You never really see how cruel people are until someone poor begs for help in a room full of rich people. Naomi Carter's shoes slipped slightly against the polished marble floor as she ran through the service hallway beneath the Grand Regent Hotel ballroom, her chest tightening with every terrified breath. Above her, a live jazz band played beneath crystal chandeliers worth more than she would make in 20 years. Guests in designer gowns laughed over champagne and lobster while downstairs, hidden behind steel kitchen doors and industrial freezers. Her father lay collapsed beside a rack of dirty dishes. "Dad, Dad, stay with me," Naomi whispered, kneeling beside Harold Carter as his breathing turned shallow and uneven. At 68 years old, Harold had spent nearly 3 decades washing dishes inside this hotel. He had arthritis in both hands, permanent back pain, and a heart condition he ignored because medication cost money they didn't have. Tonight he had insisted he was fine 20 minutes ago. Naomi had found him gripping his chest beside the sink, sweat soaking through his grey uniform shirt, while the younger kitchen workers stood frozen in panic. "Call 911, she had begged the assistant manager, but the man had looked upstairs toward the charity gala and shaken his head immediately. "Absolutely not during the event." He snapped, "Do you know who's up there tonight, senators, investors, media? We can't have ambulances pulling up front." Naomi stared at him like she had misheard the words, "My father could die." "Then get him outside quietly," the manager muttered before walking away. That sentence kept echoing inside Naomi's head now as she pushed through the ballroom doors in desperation. Golden light exploded around her. The room looked like another universe entirely. Women glittered in diamonds beneath towering floral arrangements, while servers carried silver trays through clouds of expensive perfume. Naomi's black Maid uniform suddenly felt painfully visible under the chandeliers. Heads turned immediately. Conversations slowed. A violinist missed a note. Naomi ignored them all. "Please," she shouted toward the crowd. "Is there a doctor here?" A few guests frowned as though she had interrupted a theater performance. One woman in a white silk gown narrowed her eyes with open disgust. "Why is the maid in the VIP section?" she asked loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Naomi kept moving. "My father collapsed downstairs. Please, someone call an ambulance." But before she could reach the center of the ballroom, 2 security guards stepped directly into her path. "Mum, you can't be in here," one said firmly. Naomi's breathing broke apart. "Please move. My dad can't breathe." The second guard reached for her arm. "You're causing a disturbance." Around them, whispers spread through the room like smoke. "She's hysterical, probably drunk." These staff people always create scenes. Naomi felt humiliation burn across her skin hotter than the ballroom lights. She looked around desperately at hundreds of wealthy strangers and realized none of them saw a terrified daughter. They only saw a black maid ruining their perfect evening. Then a deep voice cut cleanly through the noise. "Let her go." The entire ballroom fell silent. The voice did not rise. It did not need to. The 2 security guards released Naomi immediately, like their hands had touched fire. Every conversation inside the ballroom died at once. Even the jazz band faltered into silence beneath the towering chandeliers. Naomi turned slowly toward the staircase, her pulse hammering so hard she could barely breathe. Adrian Moretti stood above the crowd in a perfectly tailored black suit. One hand resting loosely in his pocket, while the other adjusted the cuff of his silver watch. He looked calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that made powerful people nervous. Naomi had seen him only once before from a distance when he arrived at the hotel surrounded by men in dark coats and silence thick enough to swallow a room. Everyone in Manhattan knew the Moretti name. Politicians smiled around him carefully. Billionaires lowered their voices when he entered restaurants. And now those same wealthy guests suddenly avoided eye contact altogether as Adrian descended the marble staircase one slow step at a time. The woman in the white silk gown forced an awkward laugh. "Mr. Moretti." She interrupted the gala and started screaming in front of everyone. Adrian did not even glance at her. His blue eyes remained fixed on Naomi alone. "Who is dying?" he asked quietly. The question shattered something inside her. Nobody else had asked that. Nobody else had cared. Naomi swallowed hard, fighting tears that burned behind her eyes. "My father," she whispered. He collapsed downstairs near the kitchen. Adrian stopped directly in front of her, up close. He carried the faint scent of cedar and expensive cologne beneath the cold air of the ballroom. "How long ago?" "About 15 minutes. Adrian's jaw tightened almost invisibly. "Has anyone called an ambulance?" Naomi looked down for a second, ashamed of the answer, even though it was not her fault. The manager said the gala could not be interrupted. A sharp silence spread outward through the crowd like a crack through glass. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. One man lowered his champagne flute without taking a sip. Adrian slowly turned toward the hotel manager standing near the stage. The man had gone visibly pale. "Mr. Moretti." He started nervously. "We were trying to avoid panic among the guests and maintain order during the charity event." Adrian stared at him with an expression so cold it drained the warmth from the entire room. "You delayed medical help," he said softly, "because rich people were eating dinner." The manager opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Naomi could actually hear the crystal glasses trembling slightly on nearby tables as servers froze in place. Adrian took one step closer. "What charity exactly are we celebrating tonight?" Nobody moved. Nobody dared answer. Then Adrian extended his hand toward Naomi. "Take me to him." She hesitated for half a second, shocked by the gesture itself. Men like Adrian Moretti did not walk through service hallways beside maids. They certainly did not leave million-dollar galas to help dishwashers. But something in his eyes told her he had already made his decision. Naomi nodded quickly and turned toward the ballroom exit. Behind them, whispers exploded quietly through the crowd. "He is leaving the gala." For a kitchen worker, who is that girl? Adrian ignored every word. As Naomi hurried beside him through the gold-lit corridor, she noticed something even stranger than his authority. 2 enormous bodyguards followed several steps behind, but Adrian himself walked without fear, without hesitation, like the entire world had already learned not to stand in his way. Then just before they reached the service elevator, Adrian spoke again without looking at her. "What is your father's name?" Naomi blinked. "Harold Carter." For the first time all night, Adrian Moretti stopped walking. Adrian Moretti stopped so suddenly outside the service elevator that even his bodyguards froze behind him. For one strange second, the noise of the ballroom disappeared completely. Naomi turned toward him, confused by the sudden change in his expression. "Sir," she asked softly. Adrian did not answer right away. His eyes had gone distant, locked somewhere far beyond the marble walls of the Grand Regent Hotel. "Harold Carter," he repeated quietly, almost to himself. Naomi nodded anxiously. "Yes, you know him." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime before Adrian could respond. He stepped inside without another word. Naomi followed quickly, her hands twisting together as the elevator descended toward the lower service levels. The farther down they traveled, the colder the air became. The scent of expensive perfume and wine faded into industrial detergent, steam, and stainless steel. Above them, Manhattan's elite continued sipping champagne under golden chandeliers. Down here, exhausted workers hauled trays, scrubbed dishes, and cleaned floors nobody upstairs would ever notice. Naomi glanced sideways at Adrian. Even inside a cramped service elevator, he somehow carried the same terrifying stillness. His tailored black coat looked out of place beneath flickering fluorescent lights. Yet for the first time that night, Naomi noticed something unexpected about him. He looked angry. Not loud anger, not explosive anger. Worse, the quiet kind. The kind that sat cold behind the eyes. When the elevator opened onto the kitchen floor, Several employees immediately straightened in shock. One cook nearly dropped an entire tray of plated steaks. Nobody expected Adrian Moretti to walk through the service corridors of a hotel he partially owned, especially not beside a maid in tears. Naomi hurried ahead. This way. They moved through narrow hallways lined with industrial sinks and storage shelves until she finally saw him. Harold Carter lay against the wall near the dishwashing station, one hand weakly pressed against his chest, while an older prep cook knelt beside him holding a damp towel. The moment Harold saw Naomi, he tried forcing a tired smile onto his face. "Baby girl," he whispered hoarsely. Naomi dropped beside him instantly. "Do not talk. Help is coming." Harold's breathing sounded shallow and strained. Sweat covered his forehead despite the cold air surrounding the kitchen. Adrian stood a few feet away, staring down at the old man with an unreadable expression. Then Harold looked up and saw him too, and suddenly the color drained from the older man's face. "No," Harold whispered faintly. Naomi frowned in confusion. "Dad." Harold's tired eyes stayed fixed on Adrian. "Little blue-eyed boy," he murmured softly. The entire hallway seemed to freeze. Adrian slowly removed one leather glove from his hand. "It was you," he said quietly. Naomi looked back and forth between them, completely lost. What is happening? Neither man answered her immediately. Harold gave a weak cough before speaking again. "Apartment fire, Bronx, winter of 1998. Adrian's jaw tightened. One of his bodyguards exchanged a startled glance with the other. Naomi stared at Adrian in disbelief as realization slowly transformed his face into something almost human beneath all that cold control. "I was 8 years old," Adrian said quietly. "Smoke everywhere. I could not find the stairs." Harold gave the faintest nod. "You were crying near the window." Naomi blinked rapidly, trying to process the impossible connection unfolding in front of her. Her father had spent years washing dishes in silence, riding buses before sunrise, counting dollar bills at the kitchen table so she could stay in school. Never once had he mentioned saving the life of one of the most feared men in New York. Adrian looked down at Harold for a long moment before turning sharply toward one of his guards. "Call my doctor now," he ordered. "Not the hotel medic. My doctor." The bodyguard immediately pulled out his phone. Adrian crouched slowly beside Harold, his expensive suit touching the dirty kitchen floor without hesitation. Then he spoke words nobody in that hallway ever expected to hear from a man like him. "You saved my life once," Adrian said quietly. "Tonight, I return the favor." For several seconds, nobody inside the kitchen moved. The only sounds were the distant hum of industrial refrigerators and Harold Carter's uneven breathing against the concrete wall. Naomi knelt beside her father in complete shock, her mind struggling to connect the exhausted dishwasher she had known her entire life with the frightened little boy Adrian Moretti had once been. Harold had never talked much about his past. He worked. He prayed quietly before meals. He paid bills with worn fingers and aching knees. That was who he was, the kind of man who carried heavy things in silence so other people could rest easier. And now the most feared man in Manhattan was kneeling beside him with something dangerously close to respect in his eyes. Adrian removed his coat slowly and folded it over a nearby metal cart without taking his attention off Harold. One of the younger kitchen workers stared in disbelief at the sight of a $3,000 Italian suit jacket sitting beside stacks of dirty towels and dish soap. Naomi noticed it too. Men like Adrian Moretti did not belong in places like this, but somehow he looked more real here than he had upstairs beneath the chandeliers. "You carried me down 6 flights of smoke and fire," Adrian said quietly. "I remember your voice telling me not to look back." Harold gave the faintest, tired smile. "You were crying so loud I thought the whole building would collapse from fear before the fire reached us." One of Adrian's bodyguards stepped forward carefully. "Sir, the doctor is on the way. 8 minutes out." Adrian nodded once. "And the ambulance already arriving through the private entrance." Naomi lowered her head suddenly as emotion tightened painfully in her chest. 8 minutes. An ambulance already coming. All because one powerful man decided her father mattered. Meanwhile, dozens of other people upstairs had looked directly at her fear and chosen inconvenience over compassion. Adrian noticed her expression immediately. "This should have happened the moment you asked for help," he said quietly. Naomi swallowed hard. People like us do not usually get help that fast. The words hung heavily in the cold kitchen air. Several employees nearby looked away in shame because they understood exactly what she meant. Adrian leaned back slightly on his heels, studying her with those sharp blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "People like you." Naomi hesitated before answering. "Staff. Invisible people." Adrian's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Then he looked around the kitchen slowly, at the exhausted workers standing in stained aprons, at the burn marks on tired hands, at the men and women who prepared food worth hundreds of dollars a plate but barely earned enough to pay Manhattan rent. "There is nothing invisible about keeping this entire place alive," he said coldly. Upstairs, the charity gala had resumed quietly, but word was already spreading through the ballroom in whispers. Guests checked their phones beneath the tablecloths. Servers exchanged nervous glances near the wine stations. The story traveled quickly because Manhattan's elite loved scandals almost as much as they loved pretending to care about ordinary people. The Mafia Boss had abandoned the gala for a maid's father. Nobody understood why. Back downstairs, Naomi gently adjusted the damp towel on Harold's forehead. "Dad," she whispered softly. "Why did you never tell me?" Harold looked tired suddenly, older than she had ever seen him. "Some things are not supposed to become debts," he murmured. Adrian's eyes lowered briefly at those words. Naomi noticed the subtle shift in his expression. Guilt. Real guilt. "You saved my life," Adrian said quietly. "And I never even knew your name." Harold gave a weak shrug. "You were just a boy." Silence settled heavily over the kitchen again. Then the service hallway doors burst open as paramedics rushed inside with a stretcher. But before they could reach Harold, the hotel manager suddenly appeared behind them, face pale and sweating beneath the fluorescent lights. "Mr. Moretti," he said nervously. "Perhaps we should discuss this situation privately before the press hears about it." Adrian stood slowly to his full height, and the entire hallway instantly became colder. The moment Adrian Moretti stood up, the hotel manager instinctively stepped backward. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but everyone in the hallway saw it. Fear had a way of shrinking powerful men when someone more powerful entered the room. The manager forced a nervous smile anyway, tugging at the collar of his expensive suit as paramedics carefully moved around him toward Harold Carter. "Sir, I only meant we should avoid unnecessary attention," he said carefully. "The media upstairs can be very damaging for the hotel's reputation." Adrian stared at him for a long moment without speaking. The silence itself became unbearable. Naomi had never seen anything like it before. Adrian did not raise his voice. He did not threaten anyone. Yet the entire kitchen staff stood frozen as though the temperature had suddenly dropped 20 degrees. Finally, Adrian spoke. "A man nearly died beneath your building," he said quietly. "And your first concern is the reputation of the carpet upstairs." The manager swallowed hard. "That is not what I meant." "No," Adrian tilted his head slightly. "Then explain what you meant." The man opened his mouth, but no words came out, because there was no explanation that did not sound cruel once spoken aloud. Nearby, one of the younger dishwashers lowered his eyes to the floor. Naomi noticed several staff members silently watching Adrian with expressions she recognized immediately. Not admiration exactly. Relief. The kind of relief people felt when someone important finally said out loud what ordinary workers were never allowed to say themselves. The paramedics carefully lifted Harold onto the stretcher while checking his pulse and oxygen levels. Naomi stayed close beside her father, gripping his trembling hand tightly. Harold looked exhausted now, his grey uniform wrinkled and damp beneath the fluorescent kitchen lights. One paramedic glanced toward Adrian respectfully. "We need to move now." Adrian nodded once. "You will have a police escort through midtown traffic." The paramedic blinked in surprise. "That would help." Adrian turned toward one of his guards. "Make the calls, right away, sir." The manager stared in disbelief as the bodyguard immediately stepped aside with his phone already dialing connections most people in Manhattan could never access. Naomi looked at Adrian again, trying to understand him. Upstairs, he had been surrounded by crystal chandeliers and billionaires. Down here, he moved through steam, dishwater, and fear like he belonged in both worlds equally. It unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. "Sir?" The manager interrupted nervously. "Perhaps we can offer compensation to the family privately and move forward without creating complications." Adrian slowly turned his head toward him again. "Complications," he repeated softly. "You delayed emergency care because a dishwasher's life was inconvenient to your dinner service." The manager's face flushed red. "I made a judgment call under pressure." Adrian took one calm step closer. "No," he said quietly. "You made a value judgment." The hallway fell completely silent again. Even the kitchen machines seemed quieter somehow. Adrian's blue eyes remained fixed on the manager with terrifying calm. "You decided wealthy guests deserved comfort more than working people deserved dignity." The manager's breathing visibly quickened. "Sir, please." Adrian glanced briefly around the kitchen, at the workers standing silently beside industrial sinks, at the exhausted faces lined with years of invisible labor. "Do you know what keeps places like this alive?" Adrian asked coldly. "Not the people drinking champagne upstairs." Nobody moved. Nobody dared interrupt him. "It is the people downstairs." Adrian continued quietly. "The ones nobody thanks. The ones cleaning floors at 2 in the morning. The ones washing dishes until their backs give out. The ones rich people stop seeing after they take their seats." Naomi felt tears sting her eyes unexpectedly because every word was true. Every exhausting, humiliating word. Adrian looked back toward Harold being rolled carefully toward the hallway exit. "And tonight," he said softly, "you reminded everyone exactly what kind of man you are." The manager lowered his head completely, unable to meet his eyes anymore. Then Adrian reached into his pocket, removed a sleek black phone, and made one final decision that caused several employees to gasp quietly under their breath. Effective immediately, Adrian said calmly into the phone, "I want ownership review hearings scheduled for the Grand Regent executive staff tomorrow morning." The manager went completely pale, and for the first time all night. Naomi realized the real danger in Adrian Moretti was not rage. It was how quietly he could change someone's entire life. By the time Harold Carter was wheeled out through the private service entrance, cold rain had started falling across Manhattan. Black SUVs lined the alley behind the Grand Regent Hotel, while flashing ambulance lights painted the wet pavement red and blue. Naomi stayed beside the stretcher, clutching her father's hand tightly as paramedics loaded him carefully into the ambulance. Harold looked exhausted beneath the oxygen mask, but his grip on her fingers tightened faintly before the doors closed. "You are coming with us?" one paramedic asked. Naomi nodded immediately. "Of course," but before she could climb inside, she froze. Adrian Moretti was removing his cufflinks beside the ambulance door. One of his guards stepped forward quickly. "Sir, your security team can escort them." Adrian ignored him completely. "Move," he said calmly. The guard fell silent at once. Naomi stared in confusion as Adrian climbed into the ambulance beside Harold without hesitation, his expensive dress shirt catching drops of rain beneath the city lights. Men like him did not ride inside ambulances with kitchen workers. Men like him usually stayed far away from suffering unless cameras were watching. But there were no cameras here. No reporters, no applause, just rain, sirens, and an exhausted old man struggling to breathe. The ambulance doors shut heavily behind them. As the vehicle pulled into Manhattan traffic with a police escort clearing intersections ahead, Naomi sat across from Adrian in stunned silence. The inside of the ambulance smelled like antiseptic and wet fabric. One paramedic adjusted Harold's heart monitor while another checked blood pressure readings under dim fluorescent lights. Through it all, Adrian remained completely still beside the stretcher, watching Harold with an intensity Naomi could not understand. Finally, she spoke quietly. "You really remember him?" Adrian nodded once without looking away from Harold. "I remember Smoke." His voice sounded distant now, stripped of the cold authority he carried upstairs. "I remember not being able to breathe. I remember people screaming in the hallway. Rain streaked across the ambulance windows as Manhattan blurred outside. My mother had left me alone for 10 minutes to buy medicine from the corner store." Adrian continued quietly. "The apartment building caught fire while she was gone." Naomi listened carefully. Harold's tired eyes remained half open beneath the oxygen mask. "Most people ran outside," Adrian said softly. "But your father ran back in." Naomi felt chills spread slowly through her arms despite the warmth inside the ambulance. "He carried me down 6 flights while smoke filled the stairwell." Adrian finally looked toward her directly. "I never forgot his face." Naomi lowered her eyes for a moment, overwhelmed by the strange weight of destiny pressing against this entire night. "He never told anyone," she whispered. Adrian gave the faintest, almost smile. "That sounds like him." Harold shifted weakly on the stretcher. "Your mother," he murmured through strained breathing. "She cried for an hour after finding you alive." Something flickered across Adrian's face then. Not power, not intimidation. Grief. Real grief. "She died 2 years later," he said quietly. The ambulance suddenly felt very small, very human. Naomi realized then that beneath the expensive suits and terrifying reputation, Adrian carried ghosts too. The paramedic glanced up from the monitor screen. "We stabilized him for now, but he needs immediate cardiac evaluation once we arrive." Naomi's stomach tightened instantly. "Is he going to be okay?" The paramedic hesitated just enough to frighten her. Adrian noticed immediately. "What does he need?" The paramedic answered carefully after recognizing exactly who was asking. "Specialized treatment, potential surgery depending on test results." "Then he gets it," Adrian said calmly. "Whatever he needs." Naomi blinked in shock. "Sir, we cannot afford." Adrian cut her off gently for the first time all night. "Your father once carried me out of a burning building when he had every reason to save himself first." His blue eyes settled on Harold again. "Tonight, nobody talks to me about money." The ambulance sped through rain-soaked Manhattan streets while distant sirens echoed between skyscrapers. And for the first time since entering the ballroom upstairs, Naomi no longer felt invisible. The emergency room doors opened at exactly 11:42 p.m., and suddenly the entire hospital seemed to change its rhythm. Nurses moved faster. Administrators appeared from offices without being called. Security guards straightened the moment they recognized Adrian Moretti walking beside the stretcher. Naomi noticed it immediately. Power traveled ahead of him like invisible electricity. People who had ignored ordinary suffering their entire careers suddenly became efficient when someone important entered the building. Harold Carter was rushed through double doors toward cardiac evaluation while Naomi hurried after him, exhaustion and fear crashing through her body in waves. But before she could follow the medical team farther, a nurse gently stopped her near the waiting area. "We need a few minutes with him." Naomi nodded weakly. Her legs finally gave out beneath her as she lowered herself into a stiff hospital chair beneath harsh fluorescent lights. Everything hit her all at once then. The humiliation upstairs, the fear, the ambulance ride, the terrifying possibility of losing the only family she had left. She buried her trembling hands against her face and tried not to cry in public. A cup of coffee appeared quietly beside her. Naomi looked up in surprise. Adrian Moretti sat across from her now. His tie loosened slightly for the first time all night. He looked strangely out of place beneath the cheap hospital lighting, less untouchable somehow. "You should drink something warm," he said calmly. Naomi stared at the coffee cup for a second before taking it carefully. "Thank you." The waiting room remained mostly empty except for two of Adrian's bodyguards standing silently near the elevators. Outside, the rain continued falling against the hospital windows, washing silver reflections across the polished floors. Naomi wrapped both hands around the cup, just to steady herself. "I still cannot believe my father saved your life," she admitted quietly. Adrian leaned back slightly in the plastic chair. "Neither can I." His voice carried something unfamiliar tonight. Not fear exactly, reflection. "I spent years trying to remember the man who carried me out of that building." He continued softly, "But I was a child. Faces fade over time." Naomi looked down at the coffee. "He never forgot yours." Adrian's expression shifted subtly. No, Naomi shook her head. "When I was little, he used to tell me one story every winter whenever the heat broke in our apartment." A faint smile touched her tired face despite everything. He always talked about a frightened little boy with blue eyes who kept apologizing while smoke filled the stairwell. For the first time all night, Adrian looked genuinely stunned. "Apologizing?" Naomi nodded. "He said you thought the fire was your fault because you left a toy too close to a heater." Adrian lowered his eyes slowly as memory settled heavily over him. "I did leave the toy there." Silence filled the space between them. Not uncomfortable silence, human silence. The kind shared only between people standing close to old pain. Then Naomi studied him carefully for the first time beyond the expensive suit and dangerous reputation. He looked tired. Not physically. Deeper than that, like someone who had spent years carrying responsibilities too heavy to put down. "Why did you come tonight?" she asked softly before she could stop herself. Adrian looked toward the emergency room doors. "Because men like me do not get many chances to repay real debts." Naomi frowned slightly. "You could have sent money, doctors, security." Adrian's blue eyes returned to hers. "That would have been easier." Something about the honesty in that answer unsettled her in a way she could not explain. Before she could respond, the emergency room doors suddenly opened again. A cardiologist stepped into the waiting room holding a tablet in one hand, his expression serious but controlled. Naomi immediately stood up so quickly the coffee nearly spilled from her hands. Doctor the physician looked directly at her first. "Your father is stable for now." Naomi exhaled shakily in relief. But then the doctor glanced toward Adrian Moretti with clear recognition. "However," he continued carefully, "there is something else you both need to know." Naomi's fingers tightened around the paper coffee cup so hard the lid bent inward slightly. "What do you mean?" she asked quickly. The cardiologist glanced down at the tablet in his hands before speaking carefully. "Your father has severe coronary blockage. One artery is nearly 90% restricted." Naomi felt the room tilt slightly beneath her feet. "Can medication fix it?" The doctor hesitated just long enough to answer the question without words. "He needs surgery," he said gently. "Soon?" The waiting room fell silent, except for the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Naomi looked toward the emergency room doors as though she could somehow see her father through them. Harold Carter hated hospitals. He hated debt even more. Her chest tightened painfully because she already knew exactly what he would say when he woke up. He would ask about the cost before asking about his own survival. How much, she whispered quietly. The doctor named a number large enough to drain every bit of color from her face. Naomi lowered her eyes immediately, ashamed by how impossible it sounded. It was more money than she made in years, cleaning hotel rooms and working double shifts. More money than her father had saved across decades of aching hands and overtime hours. The doctor shifted uncomfortably. "We can discuss payment plans and financial assistance options tomorrow morning." Tomorrow morning. Naomi almost laughed at the cruelty of those words. Poor people were always told to wait until tomorrow morning. More forms, more paperwork, more polite ways of saying your life depends on money you do not have. Then Adrian Moretti stood up slowly from the plastic chair beside her. "Schedule the surgery," he said calmly. The cardiologist blinked once in surprise. "Mr. Moretti, this procedure requires I did not ask for the price." Adrian interrupted quietly. The doctor immediately straightened. "Understood." Naomi turned toward Adrian in disbelief. "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "You already did too much tonight." Adrian looked at her steadily. "Your father once walked into a burning building for a child he did not know." His voice remained calm, but every word carried weight. "Do not insult either of us by pretending money matters more than that." Naomi opened her mouth to argue again, but no words came out, because deep down, beneath pride and exhaustion and fear, she knew something else too. Her father would not survive without help, real help, the kind ordinary people almost never received in time. The cardiologist nodded respectfully and stepped away to make arrangements while nurses moved quietly through the hallway. Naomi sank slowly back into the waiting room chair, emotionally drained beyond words. Adrian remained standing near the window overlooking rain-soaked Manhattan streets 30 floors below. For several moments neither of them spoke. Then Naomi noticed something strange. Adrian was staring down at his own hands. "When my mother died," he said quietly without turning around, "I could not save her." Naomi looked up slowly. "Cancer," he continued. "By the time we found the right doctors, it was too late." Rain tapped softly against the hospital glass behind him. "I had money by then. Power too. But none of it mattered." Naomi listened carefully as his reflection stared back from the dark window. "After she died," Adrian said softly, "I promised myself I would never again stand helpless while someone who deserved help was denied it." Something inside Naomi shifted, hearing those words. For the first time, she understood that Adrian's coldness was not emptiness, it was armor, carefully built over years of loss, guilt, and survival. Then Adrian finally turned back toward her. "Your father should have been protected tonight long before I arrived." Naomi lowered her eyes. "People like us usually are not." Adrian walked back toward her slowly. "Then maybe," he said quietly, "people like me have been silent too long." The waiting room fell still again. Somewhere down the hallway, monitors beeped steadily while nurses pushed carts beneath dim hospital lights. But inside that small room, something much quieter changed forever. Not power, not status, perspective. And neither of them fully realized yet how much this night was about to alter both their lives. 1 week later, the Grand Regent Hotel ballroom looked exactly the same on the surface. Crystal chandeliers glowed above polished marble floors, while wealthy guests laughed over wine and piano music drifted softly through the air. But beneath the luxury, something had changed. Everyone felt it. Staff members whispered more carefully now. Managers suddenly said please and thank you. Even the security guards stood differently when employees passed by. Fear could force obedience for a moment. But public humiliation had a way of teaching permanent lessons. Naomi Carter stepped through the service entrance wearing the same black Maid uniform she had worn the night her world nearly collapsed. Yet nothing about this walk felt the same. Conversations lowered when people saw her, not out of mockery this time. Respect? Real respect. Several kitchen workers smiled quietly as she passed. One older housekeeper squeezed her hand gently. "How is your father doing?" Naomi smiled for what felt like the first genuine time in days. The surgery went well. Relief softened every tired face around her because workers in places like this understood something wealthy guests often forgot. When one ordinary person survives hardship, everybody downstairs feels hope with them. Harold Carter was recovering slowly now in a private rehabilitation suite Naomi still could not believe existed. Physical therapy, specialists, nurses who actually listened when he spoke. Every expense had been handled before she even saw a single bill. Adrian Moretti never mentioned money again after that night. He simply made sure Harold lived. The elevator doors opened behind her suddenly, and the entire service hallway went silent, almost on instinct. Adrian Moretti stepped out alone, wearing a charcoal suit with no tie, his dark coat folded neatly over one arm. The kitchen staff immediately straightened. Naomi felt her pulse stumble unexpectedly as his blue eyes found her across the hallway. For one brief second, the terrifying Mafia Boss and the exhausted Maid simply looked at each other in silence. Then Adrian crossed the hallway calmly and handed her a small white envelope. "Your father asked me to give you this after physical therapy this morning," he said quietly. Naomi frowned slightly before opening it carefully. Inside was an old photograph worn soft at the corners. A younger Harold Carter stood beside a frightened little boy wrapped in a fire blanket outside a burned apartment building while snow covered the Bronx sidewalk behind them. Naomi stared at the picture speechlessly. "He kept it all these years," Adrian said softly. "So did I." Naomi looked up slowly. Something warmer existed in Adrian's expression now. Not softness exactly, but recognition. The kind formed when two people finally stop seeing each other through status and begin seeing each other through truth. Nearby employees pretended not to stare while absolutely staring, because nothing about this scene made sense in the world they knew. Men like Adrian Moretti were supposed to notice billionaires and celebrities, not maids with tired shoes and fathers who washed dishes for 27 years. Naomi carefully held the photograph against her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. Adrian studied her quietly for a moment before answering. "Your father once reminded me what kind of man I wanted to become." His eyes lowered briefly toward the service hallway around them. "You reminded me what kind of man I almost stopped being." The words settled heavily between them. Honest, uncomfortable, real. Then Adrian stepped aside to let a group of kitchen workers pass through the corridor carrying trays toward the ballroom upstairs. But this time, every single employee who walked past Naomi nodded respectfully toward her first. Not because she had power, not because she had connections, because dignity had finally been returned to someone they all understood too well. Adrian noticed it too, and for the first time in many years, the cold authority surrounding him eased just slightly as he watched the woman everyone once ignored walk through the hotel with her head held high. And that night, beneath the same chandeliers where people once treated her like she did not matter, the world quietly remembered what dignity looks like.